Right, at the end of the session on prioritization, I started to talk about, well, I indicated I wanted to talk about how much contingency do I need. So the point of this session is to look a bit more about how to use prioritization and the balances about making it work. Now, it's important to probably note at this point that there are three levels of prioritization. There's project level. So there's project level, which we look at really the requirements needed, the must-haves, in other words, the musts, right, to deliver the benefits that we expect out of the project. These are the ones that are ultimately required. So this is prioritizing, obviously, primarily for the musts, for the requirements we must deliver, but all the other ones are therefore in order of priority. Those that we must deliver, they ought to have there, but painful to leave out type of thing. In other words, we can have workarounds. And then the coulds, which are the icing on the cake type of thing. And it's those could haves that become our contingency. But then we have two other levels. When we're running through the project itself, we also have a time frame in the sense, so I'll put the time frame here in the sense of a time section for stage, stroke, increment. In that, bit of a spell, increment better, wouldn't it? Increment in that we're now looking at the priority within those particular time sections, right? Because we need to understand, what are the objectives of that increment or that stage, and therefore what is the order and what are the priorities within it. Doesn't it change its priority from a project perspective? It's still a must-have until it gets changed from that perspective. But from a delivery and running through the project, it's what do I need to do next? So what are the key elements in here, the key requirements for this particular objective, this increment, right? And that's what depends on dependencies and what solutions I want to get out of that particular increment. And therefore, ultimately underneath that is also at timebox, stroke work package level as well. And that's within the timebox work package itself, which are the ones that are key. Now, work package, a bit less so in some respects, because I might have a bit of flexibility with the time frame because I need all those requirements delivered, whatever the situation is. And I probably still use, iterative developments, even within the work package, to build the solution as you go through. I mean, why not? If it's practical and worthwhile doing, you do that. But from a timebox point of view, obviously, I've got a locked time frame. I need to look at the objectives within that I need to deliver. And we talk about that in another session on timeboxing. So these are the three areas. Project level, overall for the solution, and then the increment stroke stage at a release point of view, for example, and within the group build in the timebox stroke work package type level. Right? Now, there is a general guidance, of course, for the overall project delivery. So if I look at the project plan like this, or the delivery plan from this perspective, right, and I'm running, say, over 100 days, right, this is 100 days, I've not broken up into increments, it's just representative for the moment, then obviously I want a sensible percentage of that time frame delivering the core work, the minimum, the must-haves. I have the minimum requirements I need to have for the thing to work, for the solution to work, right? So there is a general guidance out there to work on a 60-20-20 rule, right? 60% for the musts, 20 for those that we should. I'm sticking to Moscow primarily, but it can be 1, 2, 3, high, medium, low. It doesn't really matter, actually. At the end of the day, the principle's the same. It's just how you want to make it work. And obviously the won'ts don't count because they're out of it. At this point in time, of course. Right? Now, therefore, you really want to have about 80% of your time delivering the core amount of work, okay, roughly. And again, it's a guidance, and we'll look at what that means in a moment. What that does not mean, by the way, is that I'm doing 60% here and 20-20 here, in that, in a time frame point of view, I'm doing all my musts here, my minimum requirements here, the shoulds and then the coulds that way around. You obviously divvy them up, because in a project perspective, we want to group them from a point of view of, dependencies and those relevant to that particular solution we're trying to get out at any one point in time. So, whether it's the form filling on the new passport application form, for example, I want to get all the requirements needed, or most of them that I need at that point to get the core work for that form filling out, right? The layout, how the forms are triggered, and how the steps are moved from one field to the next, that sort of thing. So that will be a mix of must, shoulds, and a bit of coulds, because then you need that contingency. Do bear in mind, by the way, that if that core work is only musts and shoulds, and I don't have any contingency, and I need to have some in the design phase, don't be afraid to add could have from another part of the project scope, because that's quite valid, because you either do it now or I hopefully will do it later. But it means I can build the time box with an extra bit of work. So just very quickly to explain that, right? If I've got my time box here, at the moment, that time box is say 12 days, and I've got a mixture of musts and shoulds that equal that 12 days, but that doesn't give me enough contingency because we're not really sure, especially at the beginning of the project, then I can actually put in a couple of coulds in there, right, to make that 14 days. Right. Remember, we're still in design, so we can still design around what I actually need to make the time box work. So bear that in mind too, right? And this 60-20-20 rule has a sort of relevance also within the time box itself to give you a balance as a guidance. Remember, it is only a guidance. And we'll look at how that may vary in a couple of minutes, right? So do bear that in mind, that that's the project, because believe me, what we'll end up doing, it will deliver the requirements, all the musts, across the 100 days. That's a natural thing to do, bearing on what I've just said, okay? Now, as I said, there are things to consider about how much I need to have. So think about a change in a bank, for instance, like the one with the bank teller system. You've got a series of musts. If you're looking at legislative change, it becomes a little bit more critical, because legislative change, compulsory change, and compliance change might end up showing you've probably got far more of your musts, very few shoulds, and probably very few coulds, because probably 90 to 95% of your requirements must be delivered, right? Now, if that's the case, right, so let's look at compliance, for instance. If you've got compliance, it might be that you've got 95% of your requirements in musts, and I'll put small s, right, and I'll put even smaller c to show you've got very little contingency, okay? That's okay, because if you can wear that, it doesn't stop you taking this approach in other respects by iterative development or whatever if you wish to, and running all the other aspects that are supposedly agile, but that's just somebody sticking a label on it personally. So you can do that, obviously. Now, the more understanding you have about the solution and the experience of the team, the less critical that is. But obviously it poses a bit of a risk in being able to draw that. We know that this is what happens in projects. It's, that's part of the riskiness there. On the other side, talking about riskiness, it might be that if I've got quite a risk type project, right, or the solution's not known, the instability of the business or the teams doing the work, or it's quite a new concept, you might find actually that your requirements are down to, say, 40% for your musts, you might have only 20% for your shoulds, and then you've got 40% for your coulds, right? Because I need a lot of contingency to cope with the fact that, the project's risky for all sorts of different reasons, right? So it's a balance, and it's trying to work out what that balance is, okay? Now, somewhere in between, you'll get a happy medium. Now, what I want to talk about is when we start looking at prioritization at the beginning of the project, during the planning phase, setting up the delivery plan in design, whatever you want to call that phase, then we're going to have a look at the variations of how this may happen and work out, right, in the different results you may get. So let's assume you get in there, you start to break down your requirements, you've got a group to work with, you've got the right balance of people in there, hopefully, and you start to then work out your musts, shoulds, and coulds using user stories to take your products and give them that dimension of a requirement, right? And if you end up with a figure like this one, 40, right, 20 and 40, where the 40 are the musts, these are the shoulds and the coulds, and you've taken a load out as won'ts, if that looks, remember, this is percentage of the effort, right? Not the number of requirements, but the percentage of the effort, by the way. And that's what we need to put here, percentage of the effort. And this is very important because you might have 100 requirements and only 20 of them are musts, but they take up 40 or 60% of your effort. So bear that in mind. Remember, it's about the percentage of effort, not the number of requirements. All right? So here I've got 40% and 20%, so only 60% of my project is actually delivering the core of the requirements. So let's have a look at a couple of scenarios here. The first thing you probably look at and make sure is right balance of resources, right? And that means between the business and between the build team, suppliers, technical people, and the people who are going to manage it, like business analysts and stuff, are going to help provide a bit of an objective view, right balance of resources to have made that set of requirements and decided on their minimum usable subsets and stuff like that, right? The must, shoulds and coulds. So that's the first thing, right? Now, if you decide that is correct, then the next thing you might want to do is go back and have a second review. So review the results, mainly to make sure we haven't been too harsh or we have really prioritized properly. Remember, the key thing here is we need to prioritize, right? So prioritize from a project benefit point of view, right? So the project's benefit. In other words, we have to prioritize to realize what are those requirements need to realize the beneficial change from the project's perspective. Not what people want, right? It's what the project needs. Now, often people will come with a whole pile of requirements, and as you see in product-based planning, one of the benefits of using that particular approach is it bolts those requirements, or products really initially, into a dependency and how they're linked with each other. Because somebody coming with a list of them doesn't give you any indication what they're linked with. Well, why do you need that? What's it relevant to the project? What's dependent on it? Or what is it dependent on? Right? So you need to work that out quite quickly. And that's why that particular technique is a great way of doing it. Okay, it links them all together. Okay, so, but what is important when we do prioritize, it is done with the project's beneficial change in mind. That's the key element, not what somebody wants. But there are some issues in the, requirements in there that might have that. For instance, if the business have won an award, that needs to be on the website because that's what's promoting their new products. That has to be there. Technically, it has no impact at all. But from a business perspective, it is key. Same way there may be some links that the business say, well, why do I have to have that link on the page? Technically, it has to be there for the page to work, for example, or the document to have the form filling working properly, right? So these things need to be considered. So the first thing is review the results on the second part to make sure that they represent a true reflection of the must, shoulds and coulds for the project. The high, low, and mediums, or whatever value is you're looking at, right, for the project. If you believe that they may need to change, then review them. However, do not review them to satisfy this 60-20-20. Review them from the project benefit point of view. This is very, very important. Not from this balance. Though, obviously, what we really want to do is make sure that we've got a sensible balance. Now, say we come back and say, yes, they're the true representative of what we've got. That's what we actually need. The project's fairly stable. We've got far more contingency than we actually need, right? This can ring another bell for you. So let's have a look at option number 3, right? Now, just before I go there, what it's saying here is that in this particular scenario here, for instance, if I do this up in red, up here, what it's saying that only 40% of my project, say there are 40 requirements, 40 days, it's going to give us 40 days spent on the musts, and only 20 days, right, on the shoulds. So I'm spending 60% of my project, only 60% of my project on the core of doing the work. So I've got 40% in contingency. And we decide that actually that's probably too much contingency. We don't need that. The balance is really odd. It's a fairly stable project. The team and all elements are generally fairly stable to all intents and purposes. Right, like we said here, if it wasn't, then you might need that if it's a risky type project. Okay. So what can I do? Well, if I've got far too much contingency or far too many coulds that aren't needed, they do add value, but they're not critical to the solution, I can chop them off. I can make them won'ts for the time being. What does that do for me? If I take them out and take 30% and leave only 10 of those as won'ts, now I've got 40, 60, 70 days worth of work, So I can draw that down here. And now my 40 to 60 days worth out of the 70 is a bigger proportion. The percentages are a lot more realistic. It's around about 80% again. This is realistic. Now, not prioritizing to fit that rule, I'm prioritizing to do a sensible spend of time and costs on delivering the solution. This works really well because now I can deliver the solution sooner because I'll still deliver the requirements, the 40 must-haves, over the 70 days rather than 100 days. So I'm delivering the project sooner and therefore at a lower cost as well within the budget, but more realistically, a lot quicker than than they thought of in the first place. I mean, those 30 that we take out of here, right, that become won'ts, it's very simple. We can deliver them as BAU through operational change, through a Scrum or whatever other mechanism in operational change, because they won't impact on the solution because the solution's here. So we can deliver all these little could-haves later, outside the project environment. And this is really taking this to a much more pragmatic level of using this prioritization, which we've done for many, many years in projects and programs to help us, especially on recovery ones, to get through and deliver a solution in a much more pragmatic and practical time frame for the business when it needs to be delivered. So hopefully that's given you food for thought on using prioritization and the different ways of looking at it. As I said, the third one is to remove some coulds, remove coulds to won'ts, right, for the moment, right? And these actually would now become like those. That's what we've just done there. So just bear that in mind. Hopefully that's giving you some extra thought. Thank you.